My house was broken into hours later. I didn't go back when my father looked at me and said, "Don't go home today," during dinner. Sometimes the people who know us best can sense danger before we even realize it exists. That Tuesday evening in November, sitting across from my father at Romano's Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, I had no idea that his 4 simple words would save my life. The restaurant buzzed with its usual weeknight energy. Steam rose from plates of linguine and garlic bread, mixing with the soft murmur of conversations and the occasional clink of wine glasses. Outside, Lakeshore Drive stretched endlessly under the amber glow of streetlights, while November's bitter wind rattled the windows. I pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders, grateful for the warmth inside. My father sat across from me, methodically cutting his chicken parmesan with the same precision he had used during his 30-year career as a detective with the Chicago Police Department. At 72, retirement had softened his edges slightly, but his eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning, always observing. Those eyes had solved countless cases, read hundreds of suspects, and tonight they were studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You look tired, Sarah," he said, setting down his fork. "When's the last time you took a real vacation?" I managed a weak smile, pushing the marinara sauce around my plate with a piece of bread. "You know how it is, Dad. The marketing agency doesn't run itself. We landed 3 new clients this month, and everyone expects miracles yesterday." At 38, I had built Sullivan Marketing from nothing into one of Chicago's most respected boutique agencies. Our office in River North handled campaigns for restaurants, retail chains, and tech startups throughout the Midwest. Success had come at a price, though. 16-hour days were normal, weekends were rare, and relationships had suffered. My divorce from Marcus 2 years ago still stung, even though we both knew the marriage had been dying long before the papers were signed. 3 new clients sounds like good news, Dad said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "What kind of businesses?" "The usual mix. A chain of yoga studios, a craft brewery in Milwaukee, and a boutique hotel group expanding into Illinois." I took a sip of Chianti, hoping it would ease the tension building in my shoulders. "Why do you ask?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the table. It was a habit I remembered from childhood, usually appearing when he was working through a particularly complex case. "Just curious about who you're working with these days." The conversation felt strange, loaded with subtext I couldn't decipher. Dad had always been protective, but this felt different, more urgent. I studied his weathered face, noting the deeper lines around his eyes, the way his salt and pepper hair had grown more silver in recent months. "Is everything okay with you, Dad? You seem on edge tonight." He glanced toward the restaurant's entrance, then back at me. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just been thinking about some old cases lately. You know how retirement is. Too much time to think." We ate in relative silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. The restaurant began to empty as the evening wore on, leaving us among the last tables still occupied. Our server, a young woman with a bright smile and tired eyes, refilled our water glasses and asked about dessert. "Just coffee for me," I said. "Make it 2, Dad added, then waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. The business, your independence, everything. Your mother would be proud too." The mention of Mom caught me off guard. She had been gone for 8 years now, but Dad rarely brought her up in conversation. When he did, it usually meant something significant was weighing on his mind. "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "But seriously, what's going on? You're acting like you're about to give me some terrible news." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not terrible news. Just advice from an old cop who's seen too much." The coffee arrived, along with a small plate of biscotti that neither of us had ordered. Dad thanked the server and waited until she was gone before speaking again. "Sarah, I need you to promise me something." "What kind of promise?" "Promise me you'll trust my instincts, even when they don't make sense to you." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good. Maybe you should be scared." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There are things happening in this city that most people don't see, patterns that take years to recognize. I've been watching, listening, putting pieces together." "What kind of pieces?" "The kind that suggests certain people might not be as safe as they think they are." My heart began to race. Are you talking about me specifically, or just people in general? He studied my face for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Your new clients, Sarah. Tell me about them. Specifically, tell me about the people who brought you their business. I thought back to the meetings from the past month. The yoga studio owner is Maria Santos. She's originally from Puerto Rico, opened her first studio 5 years ago. Sweet woman, very passionate about wellness. The brewery client is Tom Mitchell from Milwaukee, former corporate lawyer who decided to follow his passion for craft beer. And the hotel group is represented by Jonathan Pierce. He handles their expansion into new markets. Dad's expression didn't change, but I noticed his hand tighten around his coffee cup. Pierce. What's his background? Real estate development, I think. He mentioned having properties in several states. Very polished, professional, expensive suit, expensive watch. Why? How did he find your agency? Referral from another client, I think. Or maybe he found us online. Dad, what's this about? He drained his coffee and signaled for the check. It's about trusting the instincts that have kept me alive for 7 decades. The server brought our bill, and Dad insisted on paying despite my protests. As we gathered our coats, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't go home tonight. What? Don't go home today. Go to a hotel. Use cash. Don't use your credit cards. Don't call anyone from your usual circle. Just disappear for 12 hours. My mouth went dry. Dad, this is insane. You can't just tell me not to go home and expect me to follow that advice without explanation. I can, and I am. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life or death situations. I've been a cop for longer than you've been alive. I've learned to recognize when something isn't right, even when I can't prove it yet. We stepped outside into the Chicago night. The wind cut through my coat like a blade, and I pulled it tighter around myself. Lakeshore Drive hummed with late evening traffic, a constant river of headlights flowing north and south along the lake. If you really believe I'm in danger, why not call the police? Because I don't have evidence yet, just instincts and patterns that might mean nothing. He walked me to my car, a silver Honda Accord parked under a streetlight. But I'd rather be wrong and have you spend 1 night in a hotel than be right and have something happen to you. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. This feels like something out of a movie, Dad. People don't just tell their daughters not to go home. In movies, the person always ignores the warning. He waited while I unlocked my car, then held the door open for me. Promise me, Sarah. 1 night. Just give me 1 night to make some calls, ask some questions. I slid into the driver's seat, still reeling from the surreal nature of our conversation. 20 minutes ago, we had been discussing work and vacation plans. Now my father was essentially telling me to go into hiding. What if you're wrong? Then you'll have spent 1 night in a nice hotel, maybe caught up on some sleep, and we'll laugh about this over breakfast tomorrow. And if you're right? His expression grew grim. Then we'll deal with whatever we're facing together. I started the engine, letting it warm up while processing everything he had told me. The rational part of my mind insisted this was an overreaction, the product of an old cop's paranoia and too much free time in retirement. But another part, the part that had always trusted my father's judgment, whispered that I should listen. Okay, I said finally. 1 night. But I want answers tomorrow. You'll have them. He leaned down to the window level. Remember, cash only. Don't contact anyone from work. Don't check your usual email accounts. Just disappear until morning. He stepped back from the car, and I pulled away from the curb, watching him in my rearview mirror until he disappeared into the darkness. The drive through downtown Chicago felt different now, as if I were seeing the city through new eyes. Every car behind me seemed suspicious, every shadow potentially dangerous. I chose the Palmer House Hotel, a grand old building in the Loop that had been hosting travelers since the 1870s. The lobby gleamed with marble and crystal, a reminder of Chicago's Gilded Age. I paid cash for a single room, using a fake name and hoping the desk clerk wouldn't ask for identification. The room was elegant but impersonal, decorated in neutral tones with heavy curtains that blocked out the city lights. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, wrestling with the urge to call Dad and demand a full explanation. Instead, I turned off the device entirely, remembering his warning about staying disconnected. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by every sound in the hallway, every car alarm from the street below. I kept thinking about Jonathan Pierce, trying to remember details from our meetings. He had been charming, professional, with the kind of confident demeanor that came from success and money. But now, viewed through the lens of my father's warning, I wondered if I had missed something important. Morning arrived gray and cold, typical for November in Chicago. I showered and dressed quickly, eager to return to my normal life and get answers from Dad. The hotel restaurant served excellent coffee and fresh pastries, but I could barely taste anything. My phone, turned back on, showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were routine work communications, but 3 calls had come from my home security company. My hands trembled as I dialed their number. Sullivan Marketing, this is Jennifer from Secure Guard Systems. We've been trying to reach you about an incident at your residence. What kind of incident? There was a break-in last night around 11:30. The alarm was triggered, and we dispatched police immediately. The intruders were gone by the time officers arrived, but there was significant damage to your property. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. Damage? The responding officer described it as extensive. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, electronics destroyed. It appears they were searching for something specific. I'm sorry, Miss Sullivan. I know this must be shocking news. Shocking didn't begin to cover it. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, mind reeling with the implications. Dad's instincts had been correct. Whatever danger he had sensed was real, and his warning had quite literally saved me from walking into a nightmare. I called him immediately, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Then I tried his landline with the same result. A new kind of fear began to creep through me as I realized that while his warning had protected me, he might now be in danger himself. I grabbed my coat and headed for the elevator, my mind racing with possibilities. The drive to Dad's house in Lincoln Park took 20 minutes through morning traffic, each red light feeling like an eternity. His modest 2-story brick home sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, the same house where I had grown up, where Mom had tended her rose garden until cancer took her away. Dad's car was in the driveway, but something felt wrong. The morning newspaper still lay on the front porch, and the curtains were drawn tight against the daylight. He was always an early riser, usually up by 6 to read the Tribune with his coffee. I used my key to let myself in, calling out as I entered. Dad? It's Sarah. Silence greeted me, heavy and unnatural. The house smelled of coffee and aftershave, familiar scents that should have been comforting but instead felt ominous. I moved through the living room, noting that everything appeared normal. His retired cop habits kept the place neat and organized, nothing out of place. The kitchen showed signs of his morning routine. A single coffee mug sat in the sink, still warm to the touch. Toast crumbs on the counter suggested he had eaten breakfast. But where was he now? Dad? I called again, louder this time. I climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, each step creaking under my weight. His bedroom door was open, the bed made with military precision. The bathroom was empty, towels hung in perfect alignment. It was in his home office that I found the first clue something was seriously wrong. Dad's desk, usually immaculate, was covered with papers, photographs, and newspaper clippings. A large corkboard on the wall held what looked like a detective's investigation board, complete with red string connecting various photos and documents. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized several faces among the photographs. Jonathan Pierce stared back at me from a professional headshot, but this wasn't the polished businessman I had met. This photo showed him in handcuffs, being led away by federal agents. The accompanying newspaper clipping was dated 6 months ago. Real estate developer arrested in money laundering scheme. Another photo showed Maria Santos, my yoga studio client, but the caption identified her as Maria Delgado, wanted for questioning in connection with a drug trafficking operation. The sweet, wellness-focused woman I knew seemed like a completely different person from the one described in these police reports. Tom Mitchell's photo revealed similar contradictions. The passionate craft brewer was actually Thomas Markovich, recently released from federal prison after serving time for fraud and racketeering. The brewery was apparently a front for laundering money through fake business transactions. My hands shook as I read through Dad's handwritten notes, scattered across the desk. He had been investigating my new clients for weeks, connecting them to a larger criminal organization that used legitimate businesses as covers for illegal activities. Marketing agencies, he had written, were perfect targets because they handled large cash transactions and had access to detailed business information. One note, written in Dad's careful script, made my blood run cold. Sarah's agency identified as primary target. They need her client list, financial records, and business connections. Plan appears to be recruitment or elimination. Recruitment or elimination. The words echoed in my mind as I continued reading. Dad had pieced together a conspiracy that stretched from Chicago to Milwaukee, involving money laundering, drug trafficking, and business infiltration. My successful marketing agency had made me a target because of my legitimate connections throughout the Midwest business community. Another document showed surveillance photos of my office building, my apartment complex, even my favorite coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. Someone had been watching me for weeks, learning my routines, identifying vulnerabilities. The break-in wasn't random violence or simple burglary. It was a carefully planned operation. I found Dad's cell phone on the desk, battery dead. His landline had been unplugged from the wall, but there was a handwritten message propped against his computer monitor, clearly meant for me. Sarah, if you're reading this, then my warning worked, and you're safe. I've gone to meet with Detective Morrison at the 23rd District. Have evidence that requires immediate federal involvement. Stay away from your office and apartment until you hear from me. Trust no one connected to your new clients. The conspiracy goes deeper than I initially realized. Dad, the note was dated this morning, written in his precise handwriting, but something about it felt wrong. Dad would never leave such specific information lying around where anyone could find it. He was too careful, too experienced, unless he had been forced to write it. I carefully examined the handwriting more closely, comparing it to his other notes. The letter formations were correct, but the pressure seemed different, heavier. Several words showed slight tremors that weren't present in his investigation notes. Either Dad had been extremely nervous when he wrote this, or someone had been watching him do it. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sarah Sullivan? Yes. Who is this? This is Detective Morrison from the 23rd District. I understand your father wanted to speak with me about some information regarding your business clients. Relief flooded through me. Yes, Detective. Is he with you now? I've been trying to reach him all morning. There was a pause that lasted a few seconds too long. I'm afraid there's been a complication, Miss Sullivan. Your father never showed up for our appointment. We're concerned about his welfare. The relief vanished, replaced by ice-cold fear. What do you mean he never showed up? He called yesterday evening requesting an urgent meeting for this morning at 8 a.m., said he had evidence of criminal activity involving your business. When he didn't appear, we sent officers to his residence, but no one answered the door. I'm at his house now, I said, voice barely steady. He's not here, but there's evidence everywhere of an investigation he was conducting. Miss Sullivan, I need you to leave that location immediately. Do not touch anything else. Do not take any documents. Can you meet me at the station within the hour? Yes. But Detective, what's happening to my father? I don't know yet, but based on the information he shared during his initial call, we believe both of you may be in serious danger. I hung up and looked around Dad's office one more time, memorizing as much as I could. The investigation board told a story of corruption that stretched far beyond my small marketing agency. These people had infiltrated businesses throughout the region, using them to legitimize criminal enterprises worth millions of dollars. As I prepared to leave, I noticed one final document on Dad's desk that I had missed before. It was a property deed for a warehouse in an industrial district south of the city. The building was registered to Pierce Development Group, but Dad had circled several anomalies in the paperwork. The purchase price seemed artificially inflated, and the financing came from shell companies based in offshore tax havens. Handwritten in the margin was a single word: tonight. Whatever Dad had discovered, whatever had prompted his warning to me, was somehow connected to that warehouse. And if Detective Morrison was right about Dad missing his appointment, there was a real possibility that he was being held there against his will. I photographed the warehouse deed with my phone, then carefully returned everything to exactly where I had found it. The drive to the police station felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life, every car behind me potentially hostile, every traffic light a chance for someone to catch up. The 23rd District Station occupied a fortress-like building on Halsted Street, all concrete and bulletproof glass. Detective Morrison met me in the lobby, a tall African-American man in his 50s with kind eyes and an air of competent authority. He led me to a small interview room that smelled of coffee and industrial disinfectant. Miss Sullivan? I want you to understand that we're taking your father's disappearance very seriously. He called our office yesterday at 6 p.m. with information about criminal activity involving your business clients. Said he had evidence that required federal intervention. What kind of evidence? He mentioned money laundering, racketeering, possibly human trafficking. Claimed that several businesses, including your marketing agency, were being targeted for infiltration by a criminal organization. The room seemed to spin slightly as the full scope of the situation hit me. Detective, there's something else. I found property information in my father's office for a warehouse owned by one of my clients. He had written the word "tonight" next to it. Morrison leaned forward, suddenly more alert. What's the address? I showed him the photograph on my phone. His expression grew grim as he studied the information. Miss Sullivan, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need completely honest answers. Have you noticed anything unusual about your new clients? Any requests that seemed strange or out of the ordinary? I thought back to my meetings with Pierce, Santos, and Mitchell. Pierce asked a lot of questions about my other clients. Said he was interested in cross-promotional opportunities. But now I realize he was gathering intelligence about my entire business network. What about the others? Santos wanted access to my email marketing lists, claimed she wanted to reach wellness-focused demographics, and Mitchell asked for detailed financial projections, said he needed them for his investors. Morrison nodded grimly. They were mapping your business connections and financial capabilities. Classic infiltration tactics. But why me? I run a small marketing agency. We're successful, but we're not exactly a major corporation. That's exactly why you're valuable. Small agencies have fewer security protocols, less scrutiny, but often handle significant amounts of money and have extensive business networks. You're the perfect cover for money laundering operations. The interview continued for another hour, covering every detail of my interactions with the 3 clients. Morrison took notes constantly, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed the depth of law enforcement's interest in this case. Finally, he closed his notebook and looked at me seriously. Miss Sullivan, I'm going to be direct with you. We believe your father stumbled onto something much larger than a simple fraud scheme. The organization we're tracking has been operating for at least 3 years, infiltrating businesses across the Midwest. They recruit business owners when possible, eliminate them when necessary. Eliminate them? People who pose a threat to their operations tend to disappear. Your father's police background made him particularly dangerous to them once he started investigating. The walls of the small room seemed to be closing in around me. So what happens now? Now we find your father and shut down their operation before anyone else gets hurt. Detective Morrison arranged for me to stay at a safe house while the FBI assembled a task force to investigate the warehouse. The location was a nondescript apartment in Rogers Park, guarded by 2 federal agents who looked like they could bench press small cars. But sitting there, waiting for updates while my father remained missing, felt like torture. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Agent Rodriguez, a compact woman with steel-gray eyes, tried to keep me informed without revealing operational details. The warehouse was under surveillance, she explained, but they needed to gather more intelligence before making any moves. What if they're hurting him? I asked for the 10th time. Your father is valuable to them alive, Rodriguez replied patiently. He has information they need and they know his disappearance will attract law enforcement attention. They'll keep him breathing as long as he's useful. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was something to hold on to. As evening approached, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Rodriguez nodded for me to answer, signaling the recording equipment they had connected to my device. Sarah? The voice was weak, strained, but unmistakably my father's. Dad, thank God. Where are you? Are you hurt? I'm okay, sweetheart. Listen to me carefully. These people want something from you, and they're willing to make a trade. My heart pounded as I heard another voice in the background, a man speaking with quiet authority. Tell her exactly what we discussed, detective. Dad's voice became more formal, as if he were reading from a script. Sarah, they want you to bring all your client files, financial records, and contact lists to the warehouse on South Ashland Avenue. Come alone at midnight. If you cooperate, they'll let both of us walk away. Dad, I can't do that. The FBI is involved now. The background voice spoke again, closer to the phone this time. Miss Sullivan, this is Jonathan Pierce. I believe we've met. The cultured tone I remembered from our business meetings now carried an undertone of menace that made my skin crawl. Your father has been very helpful in explaining the scope of your business operations. We simply need to verify some information and ensure our mutual interests remain aligned. What mutual interests? I don't want anything to do with your organization. I'm afraid that choice is no longer available to you. You've seen too much, know too much. But we're reasonable people. Bring us what we need, and everyone goes home safely. Agent Rodriguez was frantically gesturing to keep Pierce talking while FBI technicians worked to trace the call. I tried to stall for time. How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know my father is really okay? There was a moment of muffled conversation. Then Dad's voice came back on the line. Sarah, remember what I taught you about chess when you were little? Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to protect the king. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in confusion. Chess? Dad had never taught me to play chess. He preferred poker. Always said it was more like real life because you had to read people and bluff your way through uncertain situations. He was giving you a message, Rodriguez said immediately. What did he mean about chess? I thought frantically, trying to decode Dad's words. He never taught me chess. He said it was too predictable, that poker was better because it involved psychological warfare. So he was telling you this was a bluff, that you shouldn't trust their offer? Maybe. Or maybe he was telling me to sacrifice something to protect what's most important. I looked around the safe house, mind racing. Agent Rodriguez, what if we give them what they want, but not the way they expect? She raised an eyebrow. Explain. They want my client files and business records, but they're not just interested in the information itself. They want to eliminate the evidence of their infiltration. What if we gave them files that look legitimate but actually contain evidence of their criminal activities? Rodriguez considered this for a moment. You're talking about setting a trap. I'm talking about giving them exactly what they deserve. The next few hours were a blur of activity, as FBI agents worked with me to prepare modified versions of my business files. We kept the real client information, but added detailed documentation of every suspicious request, every unusual payment, every red flag that I had missed during my initial meetings with Pierce and his associates. The files would look legitimate to a casual observer, but any forensic accountant would immediately recognize the pattern of money laundering and fraud. If Pierce's organization tried to use these documents to legitimize their operations, they would actually be creating evidence of their own criminal activities. Agent Martinez, a tech specialist, worked with me to embed tracking software in the digital files. Once they access these on their computers, we'll be able to monitor their entire network, he explained. We'll know who they're working with, where their money is going, everything. As midnight approached, I found myself in the back of an unmarked van parked 3 blocks from the warehouse district. The industrial area was a maze of abandoned buildings and empty lots, the kind of place where screams would go unheard and bodies could disappear forever. Are you sure about this, Miss Sullivan? Agent Rodriguez asked one final time. We can still call this off and try a different approach. I thought about Dad, probably tied up in some freezing warehouse, waiting for a rescue that might never come. He saved my life yesterday by trusting his instincts. Now I have to trust mine. The warehouse loomed against the night sky like a concrete monument to urban decay. Most of the windows were broken or boarded up, and rust stains streaked down the walls like dried blood. A single light glowed in what appeared to be an office area on the 2nd floor. I walked toward the main entrance, a heavy steel door marked with faded warnings about authorized personnel only. My hands shook as I carried a briefcase containing the modified files, knowing that FBI agents were positioned throughout the area but feeling utterly alone in the darkness. The door opened before I could knock, revealing a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and thin, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent most of his time indoors. His eyes swept over me with professional assessment before stepping aside to let me enter. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of shadows and abandoned machinery. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete floors as he led me toward a freight elevator that groaned and rattled as we ascended to the 2nd floor. Pierce was waiting in what had once been a supervisor's office, now furnished with expensive leather chairs and a mahogany desk that looked absurdly out of place in the industrial setting. He stood as I entered, extending his hand with the same practiced charm he had displayed during our business meetings. Sarah, thank you for coming. I trust you brought everything we discussed. I set the briefcase on his desk, but didn't open it. Where's my father? Safe and comfortable, I assure you. Thomas, would you bring our guest? The thin man disappeared through another door, returning moments later with Dad. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, but he was walking under his own power, and his eyes were alert. "Sarah, you shouldn't have come," he said, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was proud of me for taking the risk. "Actually, she should have come much sooner," Pierce interrupted smoothly. "This entire situation could have been avoided if you had simply accepted our business proposal instead of conducting your own investigation." Dad's jaw tightened. "Your business proposal involved turning my daughter into an unwitting accomplice to money laundering and racketeering. Your daughter's business was already serving that function. We simply wanted to make the arrangement more formal and profitable for everyone involved." I stepped forward, putting myself between Pierce and my father. "You got your files. Now let us go." Pierce smiled and opened the briefcase, quickly examining the documents inside. "Everything appears to be in order. Financial records, client lists, contact information. Very thorough." He gestured to Thomas, who produced a laptop computer and began uploading the digital files. This was the moment of truth. If the FBI's tracking software worked as promised, law enforcement would soon have access to Pierce's entire criminal network. "You know, Sarah, you've built an impressive business," Pierce continued conversationally. "It would be a shame to see it disappear entirely. We could still work together, under different circumstances." "Not interested. Perhaps you should reconsider. Your father's investigation has created complications that extend far beyond Chicago. My associates in other cities are not as understanding as I am." The implied threat was clear, but I refused to show fear. "Then I guess they'll have to be disappointed." Pierce's expression hardened slightly. "Thomas, how long until the upload is complete?" "Another 2 minutes, sir." Those 2 minutes felt like hours. Dad and I stood together in the middle of the office, surrounded by Pierce's men, waiting for either rescue or disaster. I found myself thinking about Mom, wondering what she would have done in this situation. She had always been the practical one in our family, the one who found solutions when Dad and I got too caught up in principles. Finally, Thomas looked up from the laptop. "Upload complete, sir. All files have been successfully integrated into our network." Pierce nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. Now we can proceed with the next phase of our expansion." At that moment, the warehouse lights suddenly blazed to life, flooding the building with harsh fluorescent illumination. Loudspeakers crackled to life with Agent Rodriguez's voice. "This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Everyone inside remain calm and follow instructions." Pierce's face went through a remarkable transformation, shifting from confident authority to barely controlled rage in the space of seconds. "You set us up." "Actually, you set yourselves up," I replied. "Every file you just uploaded contains detailed evidence of your criminal activities. The FBI now has access to your entire network." The next few minutes were chaos. Pierce's men drew weapons, but they were vastly outnumbered by federal agents who had been positioned throughout the warehouse. Dad grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the floor as gunfire erupted around us. When the shooting stopped, Pierce was in handcuffs, and 3 of his associates were wounded but alive. Thomas had tried to run but was tackled by Agent Martinez before he could reach the stairwell. Agent Rodriguez appeared at the office door, looking professionally satisfied. "Miss Sullivan, are you and your father injured?" "We're okay," I managed, helping Dad to his feet. "Is it over?" "This part is. But based on the intelligence we gathered from your files, we'll be making arrests in 6 states over the next 48 hours. Dad put his arm around my shoulders, and for the first time in 2 days, I felt truly safe. "How did you know the chess reference was a message?" he asked. "Because you taught me that the most important thing in any dangerous situation is to think 3 moves ahead. You knew they would demand the files, knew I would have help from law enforcement, and knew we could turn their own greed against them." He smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness I had seen since this nightmare began. "Your mother would have been proud. She always said you were smarter than both of us combined." As we walked out of the warehouse together, past the FBI agents and police cars and news crews that had somehow materialized in the industrial district, I realized that Dad's warning had saved more than just my life. It had saved dozens of businesses, hundreds of potential victims, and possibly thousands of people who would have been affected by Pierce's expanding criminal empire. The morning sun was beginning to rise over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed impossibly beautiful after the darkness we had endured. Dad and I stood together on the sidewalk, watching as Pierce and his associates were loaded into federal transport vehicles. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Now we go home, have some coffee, and try to rebuild your business with clients who aren't criminals," Dad replied. Though I suspect you'll have no shortage of legitimate customers once word gets out about how you helped bring down a major money laundering operation. Agent Rodriguez approached us with final paperwork and contact information. Miss Sullivan, the Bureau would like to offer you a consulting position. Your insights into how these organizations infiltrate small businesses could be invaluable in preventing future operations. I looked at Dad, who nodded encouragingly. I think I'd like that. But first, I need to take a real vacation. Somewhere warm, where the most dangerous thing I have to worry about is sunburn. Dad laughed, the sound carrying away the last echoes of fear and uncertainty. I know just the place. Your mother always wanted to visit Hawaii. As we walked toward the FBI vehicles that would take us home, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 48 hours. 2 days ago, I had been a successful businesswoman focused on profit margins and client acquisition. Now I was someone who had helped bring down a criminal organization and discovered reserves of courage I never knew I possessed. The experience had taught me that sometimes the people who love us most can sense danger we can't see ourselves. Dad's instincts, honed by decades of police work, had saved both our lives and protected countless others from Pierce's organization. But more than that, it had shown me the importance of trusting relationships built on years of love and shared experience. When Dad told me not to go home that night, I could have dismissed his warning as paranoia or overthinking. Instead, I chose to trust the man who had spent my entire life protecting me, even when his requests seemed irrational. That choice had made all the difference. The FBI debriefing took most of the morning, but eventually, Dad and I found ourselves sitting in his kitchen, drinking coffee and eating scrambled eggs as if this were any other day. The normalcy felt surreal after everything we had been through. You know, Dad said, reading through the Morning Tribune, there's already a story about the arrests on page 3. They're calling it one of the largest money laundering busts in Illinois history. I looked over his shoulder at the article, which mentioned my role in helping to expose the criminal network. Think this will be good or bad for business? Probably good. People trust companies that have proven they'll do the right thing, even when it's dangerous. He was right. Over the following weeks, as news of the investigation spread throughout Chicago's business community, Sullivan Marketing received inquiries from dozens of legitimate companies looking for representation. Apparently, having a reputation for integrity was more valuable than any advertising campaign I could have designed. Pierce and his associates were eventually sentenced to lengthy federal prison terms. The investigation revealed that their organization had infiltrated more than 50 businesses across the Midwest, laundering over $40 million through fraudulent transactions and shell companies. 6 months later, Dad and I were indeed sitting on a beach in Hawaii, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in brilliant shades of orange and purple. He had his feet buried in the sand and a fruity drink in his hand, looking more relaxed than I had seen him since Mom's death. Any regrets? He asked. I thought about the question seriously. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also brought us closer together and led to opportunities I never could have imagined. My consulting work with the FBI was fulfilling in ways that traditional marketing had never been, and my agency was more successful than ever. None, I said finally. You? Just one. I should have taught you to play poker years ago. If you're going to be working with federal agents, you need to know how to read people and bluff convincingly. I laughed and raised my own fruity drink in a toast. To fathers who trust their instincts, and daughters who trust their fathers. And to mothers who raise children smart enough to know the difference between courage and stupidity. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I realized that sometimes the most important lessons come from the people who love us enough to say the difficult things. Dad's warning had saved my life, but more than that, it had reminded me that family is the foundation everything else is built on. In a world full of Jonathan Pierces and criminal organizations disguised as legitimate businesses, having someone who truly knows you and cares about your welfare is more valuable than any amount of money or professional success. And sometimes, when that person looks you in the eye and says, "Don't go home today," the wisest thing you can do is listen. The weeks following our return from Hawaii brought unexpected changes to both our lives. Dad had been contacted by several former colleagues who wanted to consult with him about cold cases that might be connected to Pierce's organization. His retirement was becoming anything but quiet, and he seemed energized by the prospect of helping solve crimes that had puzzled investigators for years. My own work with the FBI had evolved beyond simple consulting. Agent Rodriguez approached me about developing a training program for small business owners, teaching them how to recognize the warning signs of criminal infiltration. The Bureau was concerned that Pierce's organization was just one of many similar groups operating throughout the country. The problem is that most business owners want to believe their new clients are legitimate, Rodriguez explained during one of our planning sessions. They see the money, hear the professional presentation, and ignore the red flags because success can be blinding. She was right. Looking back at my interactions with Pierce, Santos, and Mitchell, I could identify dozens of warning signs I had missed or rationalized away. The overly generous payment terms, the requests for information that seemed tangential to their stated needs, the way they had all appeared within such a short time frame. We need to create materials that help people trust their instincts, I suggested. Too often we talk ourselves out of suspicions because we don't want to seem paranoid or lose potential business. The training program we developed became a model for other FBI field offices. We created presentations, case studies, and interactive exercises that helped business owners understand how criminal organizations operated and what questions to ask when evaluating new clients. One particularly memorable session involved a room full of marketing agency owners from across the Midwest. As I described my experience with Pierce's organization, I could see recognition in several faces. 3 attendees approached me afterward to discuss clients who had exhibited similar patterns. "I had a guy last month who wanted access to all my financial software," said Janet Morrison, who ran a successful agency in Milwaukee. "Said he needed to verify our capacity for handling large accounts. I thought it was strange, but the contract was worth 6 figures. Another participant, David Chen from Minneapolis, described a client who had asked for detailed information about his other customers, claiming to be interested in cross-promotional opportunities. Looking back, he was mapping my entire business network, just like you described. Within 6 months, our training program had helped identify and prevent infiltration attempts in 17 different cities. The pattern was always similar. Criminals would target successful small businesses with offers that seemed too good to refuse, gradually gaining access to financial information, business contacts, and operational details. The most disturbing discovery was how widespread the problem had become. Pierce's organization was apparently just one tentacle of a much larger criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states and involved hundreds of legitimate businesses unknowingly serving as money laundering fronts. Agent Martinez, who had become the lead investigator on the expanded case, shared some of the intelligence they had gathered from Pierce's files. "We're looking at a network that generates over $200 million annually in illegal profits. They've infiltrated businesses in 12 states, from restaurants and retail stores to consulting firms and technology companies." The scope was staggering. What had started as my father's instinctive concern about 3 suspicious clients had uncovered one of the largest criminal enterprises in the region's history. My relationship with Dad had deepened through our shared experience. We talked more frequently, met for dinner at least twice a week, and had developed a shorthand communication that came from having faced real danger together. He had become not just my father, but my most trusted advisor and closest friend. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he said one evening as we walked along Lake Michigan. The November air was crisp, reminding me of that night at Romano's when everything had started. "I'm proud that you trusted me enough to listen, even when my warning didn't make sense. I'm proud that you cared enough to investigate when something felt wrong," I replied. Most people would have dismissed those suspicions as coincidence. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves crash against the shoreline. The city lights reflected off the water, creating a shimmering pathway that stretched toward the horizon. "Mom would have handled this better than either of us," Dad said eventually. "How do you figure that?" "She would have seen through Pierce immediately. Remember how she could always tell when you were lying about finishing your homework or cleaning your room? She had this ability to read people that was almost supernatural." I smiled at the memory. Mom had indeed possessed an uncanny ability to see through deception, whether it came from her teenage daughter or the door-to-door salesman who occasionally tried to scam elderly residents in our neighborhood. "She would have been terrified but proud," I said. "Terrified that we were in danger, proud that we handled it together. And she would have insisted on taking that Hawaii vacation years ago instead of waiting for a crisis to force us into it." We both laughed, remembering how Mom had always been the one pushing for family vacations, while Dad insisted he was too busy with work. It was one of the ironies of life that it often took tragedy or danger to remind us what was truly important. The criminal trials began the following spring, creating a media sensation that kept Chicago's news outlets busy for months. Pierce and his top lieutenants faced federal charges that carried potential sentences of decades in prison. The prosecution's case was built largely on the evidence we had helped gather, making me a key witness in several proceedings. Testifying in federal court was both nerve-wracking and cathartic. Standing in front of a jury, describing how Pierce's organization had manipulated and threatened innocent business owners, I felt a sense of justice that made all the fear and uncertainty worthwhile. Pierce himself maintained his facade of professional respectability throughout the trial, wearing expensive suits and speaking in the same cultured tones I remembered from our business meetings. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and testimony from dozens of victims painted a clear picture of systematic criminal enterprise. The most powerful moment came when Dad testified about his investigation and the threats made against our family. His years of courtroom experience showed as he calmly and methodically described the evidence he had gathered, the conclusions he had drawn, and the actions he had taken to protect me. "Detective Sullivan," the prosecutor asked, "what made you suspicious of your daughter's new clients?" 30 years of police work teaches you to recognize patterns, Dad replied. 3 new clients appearing within a month, all offering unusually generous terms, all asking questions that seemed designed to gather intelligence rather than conduct legitimate business. In my experience, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And your decision to warn your daughter not to go home that evening was based on the same instincts that had kept me alive for 3 decades as a cop. I couldn't prove anything yet, but I knew Sarah was in immediate danger. The defense attorney tried to portray Dad as a paranoid retired police officer who had overreacted to normal business practices. But the evidence of the break-in, combined with the extensive criminal network that had been uncovered, made their arguments seem desperate and unconvincing. Pierce was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His associates received terms ranging from 8 to 15 years, depending on their roles in the organization. The sentences were severe enough to send a clear message to other criminal groups considering similar operations. More importantly, the investigation led to the recovery of over $40 million in stolen assets, much of which was returned to the legitimate businesses that had been victimized. Janet Morrison's agency in Milwaukee received back nearly $300,000 that had been laundered through her accounts without her knowledge. The FBI's investigation continued for another year, ultimately resulting in arrests in 9 states and the dismantling of what prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in the country's history. The case became a model for how federal agencies could work with local businesses to identify and prevent criminal infiltration. My consulting work with the Bureau expanded to include presentations at law enforcement conferences and business security seminars. I found myself traveling frequently, sharing our story and helping other communities develop their own defense strategies against organized crime. The irony wasn't lost on me that Pierce's attempt to exploit my business had actually made me more successful than I ever could have imagined. Sullivan Marketing now specialized in security consulting for small businesses, helping them protect themselves against exactly the kind of threats we had faced. But success wasn't the most important outcome of our experience. The most valuable result was the deepened relationship between Dad and me, built on shared danger and mutual trust. We had faced the worst possible scenario together and emerged stronger. 1 year after the warehouse confrontation, Dad and I returned to Romano's Italian restaurant for dinner. We sat at the same table where he had first warned me about going home, sharing a bottle of Chianti and reflecting on how much our lives had changed. "Any regrets about getting involved?" I asked, echoing the conversation we had shared on the beach in Hawaii. "Only that it took a criminal organization to make me realize how important it is to spend time with the people you love," he replied. "I wasted too many years thinking that work was more important than family." "You spent those years protecting families. That's not wasted time." "Maybe, but I spent less time protecting my own family than I should have." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You protected me when it mattered most. That's what I'll remember." As we left the restaurant that night, walking past the same streetlights and traffic patterns that had surrounded us during our fateful dinner conversation, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unpredictable nature of life. Danger and fear had brought us closer together, while success and recognition had taught us to value the relationships that made everything else meaningful. The story that had begun with 4 simple words, "Don't go home today," had become a testament to the power of trusting the people who love us most. In a world full of threats, both obvious and hidden, having someone who truly knows and cares about us is the most valuable protection we can have. And sometimes the wisdom to listen when that person speaks can literally save your life.